Hey guys, tonight we're traveling somewhere unexpected, not through time just yet, but through scent. Imagine you're standing on a hillside so dry the soil crumbles underfoot, where fierce mountain winds tug at your robe and a scatter of wild tulips, no bigger than your palm, shiver in the breeze. These aren't the kind of tulips you see in Dutch postcards. No, these are unruly, star-shaped rebels that bloom without permission, thriving in the stony ridges of Central Asia long before the Ottomans ever built a palace. The scent is faint, almost dismissive, just enough to make you lean in. This is where it starts, though you don't know it yet. The empire of tulips, the language of scent, and the whispered codes of power that once ruled a garden so carefully that the wrong breeze could mean exile. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you are all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You hike down from that wild hillside into centuries of history into the Ottoman world, where tulips are no longer wild but chosen. You don't know it yet, but these flowers will one day get their own economic bubble, their own poetry, their own scandal. For now, though, the tulip is just arriving in Anatolia, brought in through the Silk Roads like a shy foreign guest no one can quite understand. The Ottomans didn't invent the tulip, but they fell for it hard like a poet spotting their muse at a market stall. Some say the flower's name, Layl, was first whispered in Persian poems. Others argue it was simply misheard, mispronounced, and passed around like a game of telephone between empires. Historians still argue whether the earliest tulips planted in Ottoman soil were red or yellow, but honestly, by the time the gardeners were done with them, they had 23 names for blush. Your feet crunch softly on crushed clove pods as you walk into one of the earliest palace gardens in Edirne, before Istanbul even became the empire's heart. The air smells like damp stone, horse sweat, and saffron stew wafting from the kitchens. You're led down rows of what look like remarkable plants, green shoots poking through soil, tightly wound buds, but the head gardener, or Bostangba, leans close and murmurs, "Wait for the second moon." He's not being cryptic for fun. Ottoman gardeners knew precisely when a tulip should open, and they expected it to perform. If the bloom was too early, that bulb was considered impatient, not a compliment. Too late, the gardener might lose favor. The stakes were higher than they seemed. These were not humble flowers. They were the empire's quiet celebrities. The tulip was a mirror reflecting Ottoman aesthetics, discipline, even status. But here's the twist. It wasn't just about how the flower looked. It was about how it smelled, and when the tulip's appearance was important, yes. But the Ottomans elevated the invisible. They trained their noses like others trained their swords. You're told to kneel and sniff a bloom just opened, still shy. At first, it smells like nothing, but then, a flicker of rose water, a thread of almonds, and something else sharp, like pepper dust caught in silk. That, your guide says, is deliberate, a coded blend. You're not in a garden anymore. You're in a library of scent, where tulips are chapters and their fragrances are secret poems and the readers. They're not everyone. You needed training to smell like an Ottoman. There's a reason European envoys stumbled through court ceremonies confused, sweating in velvet, while a tulip's opening time determined when the Sultan would appear. A flower could signal a meeting, an insult, or a seduction. You were expected to know the difference. And then there's the humor, because yes, even empires that revere flowers have jokes. There's a tale about a sultan who plucked a prized tulip, sniffed it, frowned, and declared, "It smells like my brother's advice." No one knew if that was an insult or a compliment, but the gardener who grew it was reassigned to plum trees the next week. Maybe that was safer. Tulips could be political landmines. Still, you stay in the garden, drawn in by the strange silence that hums under the birdsong. Gardeners move without speaking. They nod to one another and seem to communicate by the way they angle their shears or the rhythms of their footsteps on gravel. You'll learn why soon enough. For now, just follow the scent trail: soft rose, faint sandalwood, a touch of mint at the edges. These aren't just flowers, they're sentences, and somehow you've become a reader. You were still in the garden, but now it's years later, and the soil beneath your feet has shifted geographically. Yes, but metaphorically. You're in Istanbul now, capital of a swelling empire, and tulips aren't just a curiosity anymore. They were obsessed. The streets near Topkapı Palace are alive with rumors of a new tulip that opens only during the last evening prayer call, or of a bulb so rare it cost a steward his inheritance and his dignity. You walk past shops selling dried rose hips, candied quince, and cinnamon bark, but it's the flowers, always the flowers, that hold the most power. Sultans are sending gardeners west for seeds and east for scent notes. You overhear an old man muttering that he saw a tulip that looked like a lion's tongue red with yellow streaks and he hasn't stopped dreaming of it since. You're starting to understand, this isn't just horticulture, it's devotion. You step into the inner courtyards of the palace, where the Sultan's most trusted gardeners work. These are no ordinary landscapers, they're trained in botany, scent theory, and subtle court politics. They know which tulip means admiration and which one means don't speak to me for 3 days. You're shown a velvet pouch that once carried a single bulb gifted from one ruler to another. The pouch is perfumed, lined with cedar and amber resin, and sealed with wax stamped with the Tugra imperial calligraphy so ornate it looks like a secret language. Historians still argue whether the Sultan who received that bulb ever actually planted it, or simply used it as leverage in a negotiation involving border trade and, weirdly, apricot syrup. That's Ottoman diplomacy, soft, fragrant, and never straightforward. You trail behind a group of visitors invited to the Sultan's spring tulip viewing. Everyone's dressed in soft silks and embroidered kaftans, the kind that rustle like pages when they walk. The tulips are arranged by scent first, color second. You pass a bed of what looks like identical white blooms, but as you inhale, the air shifts from vanilla to musk to something like dry grass after rain. Each row represents a different coded message, designed to be understood only by those in the inner circle. You lean down and breathe deep immediately, your mind lights up with warmth and spice and a memory you can place. Maybe that's part of the magic. One of the gardeners, face weathered and hands permanently stained from soil and saffron pollen, leans close and whispers, "This one's called Lament of the Poet." You nod, not knowing whether that is because of its scent or the fact that it only opens one petal at a time. Another nearby variety is known as Red Silence. It's supposedly so fragrant that people once fainted near it, though you suspect that's a bit of tulip mythology spun for dramatic effect. Still, no one's taking chances. An elderly courtier keeps dabbing rose water under his nose, like a scent buffer, just in case. As evening falls, the garden glows. Lanterns swing gently from wooden beams, casting golden circles on the ground. The tulips catch the light like tiny stained glass windows. You rehanded a small card printed with a poem, a ghazal written by a sultan who once tried to crossbreed tulips by moonlight, claiming that lunar influence would birth new colors. It didn't. What he got instead was a mutant bloom that smelled like bitter almond and rotted sandalwood. He named it Failed Sun, and no one's grown it since. But these poetic failures only deepened the Ottoman love affair with tulips. They were metaphors, status symbols, diplomatic tools, and spiritual messengers all at once. Their very ephemerality made them desirable. A tulip that bloomed too long was considered vulgar, like a guest who didn't know when to leave. You're told some were bred specifically to wilt within 3 days, leaving behind only scent, a fading perfume trail like a letter you never got to finish reading. At this point, you realize something peculiar. No one touches the tulips directly. Even the gardeners use curved wooden spoons or padded gloves. There's a reverence here, but also a superstition. Touching a tulip with bare hands is believed to distort its scent. Some say the oils from your skin confuse the flower. Others believe it angers the flower's spirit. The Ottomans weren't afraid to blend science with spiritual caution. And now, standing beneath a vine-covered arch, you catch a trace of oud smoke in the air. Someone's burning it slowly, letting the smell thread between the flower beds like incense through a library. You close your eyes. There it is again, that shift. You don't just smell these tulips. You read them, not with your eyes, but with your breath, your skin, even your memory. And just when you think you understand, someone mentions the Garden of the Defa section of the palace grounds tended entirely by mute gardeners. Supposedly they communicated through scent placement and hand signals alone. The Sultan believed that silence made flowers stronger. No one argues. No one ever does when it comes to tulips. You return to the gardens the next morning, and the change is immediate. The air is cooler, but denser, thicker with scent, as if it rained roses in the night and then someone wrung out the sky. A thin mist curls around the base of the tulips like stage fog, and every gardener moves more slowly than usual, as if aware that you've entered the laboratory part of the palace grounds. This is not the space where casual guests stroll or where diplomats sip sherbet. This is where tulips are tested, coaxed, and trained like elite athletes, where the Ottoman Empire conducts its botanical symphony and the chief gardener is both conductor and alchemist. You are handed a folded cloth scented with something sharp, lemon balm. You think and told to clean your senses before proceeding. Apparently, last night's roasted eggplant with garlic still clings to your nose like a foghorn, and in these gardens, that's as offensive as showing up to a poetry reading with a drum. Once cleared, you step onto crushed lavender paths flanked by beds of near-identical tulips. You wouldn't be able to tell them apart visually unless you stared at them for hours. But then the air hits differently. From left, a smoky cedar profile. From right, a soft powdery finish with notes of dried fig. This isn't about what you see, it's about what lingers in the breath between breaths. Each bloom in this quadrant has been assigned a scent profile, what the court refers to, semi-officially, as a Lakokusu imzas, or tulip scent signature. These signatures aren't made up randomly. They're created through a combination of cross-pollination, soil infusion, and something rather mysterious involving bees, beeswax, and handwritten scent scrolls that are soaked in rose oil and buried under the moonlight. Historians still argue whether the bees are actually part of the process or just happen to enjoy high-end flowers. But you'll hear one gardener insist that a tulip doesn't know it's complete until a bee whispers to it. You don't question it. You meet the royal garden chemist, or as the Ottomans called them, Tarustas, who's crouched beside a bed of sleeping tulips, holding a tray of tiny glass jars. Each contains a pale liquid, steam distilled. Scents pulled from tulips that bloomed the week prior. These distilled extracts aren't for perfume exactly, and they're definitely not for sale. They're for memory storage, for keeping a flower alive past its lifespan. You watch as the chemist dabs a drop of scent onto a white silk ribbon and ties it around a branch. The ribbon swings slightly in the morning breeze, releasing a whisper of aroma as it does. The gardener nods. This, apparently, means the scent will age well. You resist the urge to ask how a smell can have a future. You're guided deeper into the section known simply as Koku Bahezi, the fragrance garden. It's not listed on any public map. No fountains here, no songbirds, no distracting visuals. It's eerily quiet, except for the occasional shift of a gardener's robe brushing against rosemary. Here, tulips are bred not for color or size, but solely for their invisible traits. You pass beds labeled with symbols rather than names. A crescent moon, a teardrop, a pair of swans. Each symbol corresponds to a scent code, and those codes tell stories: sadness, joy, anticipation, longing. One bloom, you're told, smells exactly like the wooden shelves of a scholar's library. Another, like cinnamon soaked in seawater. You blink at that. Was that on purpose? You ask, the gardener only smiles. There is a myth among the gardeners that if you line up a dozen scent-coated tulips in the right order, the breeze will carry a full memory, like watching a dream play out in your nose. Some say it was used once to deliver secret instructions to a foreign dignitary. Others claim the Sultan used such arrangements to mourn lost loves in private. Either way, no one's been able to recreate it since, or so they say. And now, the strangest detail of all, the gardeners here don't speak. Not by rule, but by habit. This place demands silence not just for concentration, but because sound interferes with scent. Vibrations, it turns out, can disturb how smells settle. One gardener drops a tiny clay chime by accident, and another scowls so hard you'd think someone insulted his ancestors. You're starting to realize that this garden doesn't grow tulips, it grows language, coated in air and soil. The garden chemist offers you a tiny scroll smaller than a finger and instructs you to sniff it lightly. The paper has been steeped in a mixture of sandalwood and tulip oil. As you inhale, you feel a strange warmth behind your eyes, like remembering something you've never actually lived. That's when you notice the symbol at the top of the scroll, a winged tulip. The chemist nods. Flight, escape, change. You pocket the scroll. You don't know why, it just feels like something you might need. And as you prepare to leave, the head gardener kneels by a tulip with pale blue streaks so rare it doesn't even have a name. He closes his eyes, inhales deeply, and says softly, "Smells like forgiveness." You're not sure whether he's talking to you or to the flower. You re-walking now beneath latticed archways where the scent clings to the wood like a memory: sour cherry, rosewater, and something you can't name but feels like candle smoke after a storm. This is the quieter heart of the garden, and the closer you get, the more you realize you're no longer walking among flowers. You're entering a conversation. The ones speaking? The Layustaler, the tulip masters. You won't find their names etched in marble or listed in court records. They didn't sign their work, and they rarely spoke aloud. But every bloom here carries their signature in scent, shape, and the subtle way a petal curves as if listening. They were the ghostwriters of the empire's fragrance. Language, these gardeners. Many were deaf or mute, some by birth, others by palace design, chosen precisely because they listened with their hands and communicated through motion. A spoken word, after all, was a temporary thing, but a fragrance? That could linger for days. You watch one Layustas at work now, an older man with palms calloused into maps, cradling a bulb like it's glass. He lays it into soil not with force, but with choreography, pressing 2 fingers to the earth, brushing his wrist forward, and then tapping the rim of the pot. It's like watching someone cast a spell without words. There's a legend you overhear, whispered by a younger apprentice who smells faintly of mint and beeswax. It goes like this. During the reign of Sultan Ahmed III, a tulip bloomed out of season, its petals veined in silver and smelling of cloves and jasmine, a combination never seen before. The liustas who nurtured it was summoned to explain. He simply brought forward a ribbon soaked in the flower's distilled essence and handed it over. The Sultan sniffed it once, closed his eyes, and reportedly wept. No one knows why. Historians still argue whether that tulip was created by design or divine accident, but either way, the gardener was never seen again. Some say he chose exile, others believe he was given a garden no one else could find. What's certain is that these masters developed an entire system of floral syntax sent as grammar, color as punctuation, and bloom shape as tone. A narrow white tulip tinged with purple might mean regret, but if its petals curled inward, the meaning shifted to bitterness contained. Add a drop of basil oil to its roots, and the emotion changed again, grief transmuted to memory. This wasn't just gardening. It was language, and those fluent in it could say things with flowers that would started wars if spoken aloud. You pass a trellis overgrown with vines where apprentices hang thin strips of linen. Each is lightly scented and arranged to catch different wind patterns, simulating how tulips release fragrance at different times of day. The clothes dance in the air like prayer flags, and your guide, a woman with a cluster of dried cloves tied at her waist, tells you that new apprentices must memorize 88 distinct fragrance patterns before they even allowed to plant a bulb. You think back to high school chemistry and realize this would have destroyed you. There's humor here, too quiet, sleepy humor that sneaks up on you like an unexpected yawn. One liustas has named a misbehaving tulip the vizier's left eye because it droops at noon and smells like dust. Another proudly shows you a bloom that only releases its fragrance if you clap gently near it. He calls it the Sultan's joke, though you get the sense it's more of a prank on visitors. You oblige with a soft clap, and sure enough, a puff of scent drifts upward: lemon, nutmeg, and something mischievous, like the ghost of a bakery. You almost laugh, but it feels sacred, so you let it stay as a smile. You peek into a tiny toolshed where scent recipes are stored not in books, but in stone jars, sealed with wax and labeled only by symbols. A lion paw, a cracked hourglass, a tulip drawn upside down. One jar, you're told, holds a blend that mimics the smell of lightning hitting the sea. Another replicates the memory of a mother's lap. These aren't fragrances you bottle for vanity. These are for transmission, for passing on emotions too tender for voice. And still, the masters work, silently, deliberately, with the patience of people who know that beauty worth remembering can't be rushed. You notice that none of them walk straight through the garden. They zigzag, pause, touch leaves, bow slightly to certain plants. Ritual. Respect? Maybe both. You find yourself doing the same without meaning to. Then comes the most intimate moment of all. You rehanded a small tulip bulb in a silk-wrapped pouch and asked to press it between your palms, not to crush it, just to warm it. The warmth, you're told, helps it remember. Remember what? You ask, the gardener shrugs, where it came from. You look down at the bulb, silent, dull, utterly unremarkable, and think, this could bloom into forgiveness or longing or a joke about the vizier's eye. You'll never know until it opens, but the liustaler already do. You kneel in the grass now, hands lightly dusted with earth, hovering over a flower bed that seems to hum in silence. There are no labels here, no painted signs or tags tied with twine. And yet each tulip before you tells a story, not with shape or color, but with something far more elusive. You inhale, and the air carries soft waves of memory, sandalwood, apricot, the faintest ghost of burnt sugar. This is your first true encounter with what the Ottomans called a kokoudilia fragrance code. Not a metaphor, not poetic exaggeration, but a full language stitched from scent, constructed and read by those who knew how to breathe with purpose. You told these codes were created using a complex blend of scent layers, what modern perfumers might call top, middle, and base notes. But for the Ottomans, it was more musical than chemical. Each flower's aroma had to rise like a verse, linger like a chorus, and vanish like the end of a whispered secret. Historians still argue whether these combinations were carefully documented in hidden archives or passed entirely through oral tradition, but what's undeniable is their intricacy. Imagine a tulip that begins with violet, shifts into citrus rind, then settles into an afterscent of old wood smoke. That isn't just pretty, it's a sentence. And depending on how long each phase lasts, that sentence might say, "Return to me when spring arrives," or "You were never mine, but I remember you anyway." The coding process began in the soil. Gardeners infused earth with crushed herbs and spices before the bulb was even planted: basil for calm, clove for sorrow, myrtle for protection. Some claim that strips of linen soaked in scented oil were laid in the planting trench beneath the bulb like a kind of perfumed foundation. And above the soil, scent was coaxed with sunlight filtering through stained glass panels which altered not just light quality but temperature, and according to one eccentric theory, mood resonance, a term you suspect was invented to make sultans feel poetic about irrigation systems. Then came the companion plants, roses, marjoram, even bitter orange trees strategically placed to affect airflow and perfume diffusion. This wasn't random gardening, it was as precise as astronomy. You're shown a chart carved into wood that tracks wind direction, sun position, and time of bloom for each variety. And right in the middle? A circle marked with a crescent moon and surrounded by scent glyphs: teardrop for lavender, spiral for cardamom, triangle for musk. It looks like a horoscope written in fragrance. One gardener explains mostly through gestures, as words feel too loud here, that each tulip is expected to speak at a specific hour. Some are bred to release scent only at twilight. Others open at the moment the noon call to prayer echoes across Istanbul's domes. There's a deep reverence for that timing. If a tulip speaks too soon or too late, it's considered rude. You try to imagine a flower apologizing for talking over someone and chuckling to yourself, but part of you wonders if that's not too far from the truth. You're led to a circular bed of tulips, all facing inward, their slender stems leaning slightly toward the center like courtiers listening to a secret. These are what they call the Ifri clary-coated flowers. You're told the arrangement is meant to simulate a private conversation. Each bloom was grown with a specific scent-layered message, and together they form a statement too complex to voice aloud. The whole bed smells like a love letter read beneath cedar beams, a combination of rosewater, ink, warm skin, and dried plum. You find yourself moved in a way you can't explain, but the codes didn't always whisper. Love. Some tulips were scented with intent. You hear about the dismissal code, a combination of thyme, anise, and vinegar, planted in the private gardens of viziers who had lost favor. When the Sultan visited and caught that unmistakable blend in the air, it meant only one thing: pack your bags. Another blend, cinnamon, mint, and crushed laurel, was known to indicate favor. It meant someone was due a promotion. Their scent only rises after sundown and includes a fleeting note of myrrh. The gardener calls them memory anchors. He claims they help palace residents remember forgotten dreams. Again, you're not sure if this is botanical truth or bedtime myth, but at this point, the difference hardly matters. Everything in this garden walks the line between reality and metaphor, and you're beginning to understand that was always the point. And then someone asks you to try something. You're handed a blindfold thin silk, perfumed with rose and clove, and led to 3 tulips. You sniff them one by one, trying to guess their mood. The first smells like pine and fig. Your mind jumps to childhood. The second has pepper and jasmine. You think of a letter you never sent. The third is musk and lemon balm. Your chest tightens, but you don't know why. You remove the blindfold and smile awkwardly. The gardener says nothing, just nod. That was the whole test. You realize the code was never meant to be cracked logically. It's about response. About feeling something and not knowing why. A language designed not to speak to your brain but to your breath. You wake to the sound of soft sweeping branches brushing gravel, maybe, or just the rhythmic hush of brooms made from reeds and stitched date fibers. The air is already warm, and you realize you've fallen asleep in the shadow of a trellis laced with sleepy tulips. The gardener who finds you doesn't scold. He just smiles as if to say, "It happens." You're quickly ushered into a new part of the grounds where things feel different. Not quieter, because the whole palace garden seems to hum with silence, but more deliberate. This is where the daily rhythm of a tulip tuner unfolds, and today you're invited to follow. The man leading you is barefoot, his toes caked in soil but his robe pristine. His first act is not to touch a plant, but to smell his own hands. He frowns slightly, dips them in a copper bowl of rosewater and dried sage, then inhales again. Satisfied, he begins. You trail him like an eager assistant, your nose twitching with every step. First stop, a tool chest lined with tiny, scent-neutral brushes, tweezers, carved from sandalwood, and scissors that look far too delicate to have ever been used on anything but dreams. The morning inspection begins with what's called the Kaklama Mberi, the sniff circle. This involves walking the outer ring of the beds and catching the breeze from all 4 directions. Today, the eastern breeze is thick with cinnamon and crushed apricot pits, slightly off for this time of year. Your guide notes with a tilt of the head. He marks something in a small slate board with chalk, a glyph resembling an open tulip beside a curved arrow. Apparently, the scent is drifting too early in the day, meaning the bloom might peak before the next moon. The problem isn't catastrophic, but in this place, timing is everything. After the breeze check comes the shadow dance. No, really, that's what they call it. You notice that as the sun rises, your guide is measuring how light filters through latticework and lands on specific flowers. Tulips here aren't just sunbathers, they're light eaters. Some need a harsh slap of midday heat to release their oils. Others only react to soft dapples, like sunlight through a silk curtain. One of the apprentices shows you a folded parchment that maps sunlight hours like a tide chart. It's written entirely in pictograms, arrows, dots, slanted bars, but you begin to see the pattern. The garden is a sundial of scent. You stop for a meal break, though it feels more like a ceremonial intermission. The gardener places a tray on a flat rock, figs, cheese wrapped in leaves, and bread perfumed with sesame and thyme. But what captures your attention is a small bowl of sugar-soaked tulip petals. They're soft and cold, like flower ice. You're told these are petals from a variety that no longer grows a ghost flavor. Eating them is like reading a forgotten word aloud. You hesitate, then take a bite. The taste is strange floral, yes, but also smoky, like the aftertaste of a secret. In the afternoon, you observe a tuning session. This is the heart of the day, when the tulip tuner adjusts conditions to enhance or mute specific scent profiles. It begins with watering, but not with plain water. Each variety receives a different infusion. Some are steeped in mint, others in ginger root, one even in vinegar laced with crushed lilac. The water is sprinkled using hollowed-out gourds, not metal cans. Metal, your guide whispers, makes the scent metallic too. You nod solemnly, pretending to understand. Next comes the scent pairing. This is like matchmaking, but instead of hearts, you're dealing with noses. A blooming tulip that smells too strong might be placed beside one that smells too faint, balancing the overall blend. There's a science to the madness, though your guide admits that sometimes they simply trust the wind. Historians still argue whether these pairings were recorded or improvised daily based on instinct. Some say the best tuners used pulse readings from their own wrists to decide. Others claim they just sniffed and hoped. As the sun slides westward, you witness the preparation for the Akamko Kusu, the evening scent. It's a ceremony of sorts. The gardeners line the pathways with crushed herbs, rosemary, mint, hyssop, and light small oil lamps filled with jasmine and sandalwood. The heat from the lamps warms the air, nudging the tulips to release their final fragrance of the day. The effect is dizzying. You sit on a bench and simply breathe. There's no single smell, just waves, sweetness, spice, whetstone, memory, something like sorrow wrapped in velvet. You ask what happens if a tulip refuses to bloom or release scent. Your guide simply shrugs. Then we wait. He doesn't see failure in that, only a delay, a missed conversation that might be resumed another day. Sometimes, the tuner will whisper to the bloom. Not with words, but with breath. A puff of warm air, a hum from the throat. You've seen it work, or maybe you imagined it. Near sunset, one final act remains. The ceiling. Select blooms are covered with glass domes perforated with tiny holes. This traps the day's fragrance like a message in a bottle. Tomorrow morning, the tuner will uncap each dome and inhale to determine whether the tulip remembered its code. Some do, some don't, but the process isn't about control. It's about conversation, partnership, trust. And as the garden settles into stillness, you realize you've spent the whole day not just watching tulips but listening to them, and slowly, they're starting to talk back. You arrive at the garden gate earlier than usual, just after first light, when the dew still clings to the petals like whispered promises. But something's different today. The air is thick, not with the usual fragrance symphony, but with tension. Gardeners move more briskly. A pouch of crushed rosemary spills near the entrance, and no one stops to gather it. You trail a young apprentice who throws furtive glances over his shoulder, and soon you're led not to a flower bed but to the back wall of a shaded grove. There, a low wooden door is unlatched with care. You about to enter the part of the story no one talks about above ground, the world of scent smuggling. Yes, smuggling, not of gold, not of silk, but of scent. Because when your empire becomes fluent in a fragrance language only a few can read, that language suddenly has value, immense, invisible value. You're told that during the reign of Sultan Selim II, a tulip variety known only as Midnight Thought was nearly stolen by a visiting ambassador's envoy. Not the bulb, mind you, that was easy enough to protect, it was the scent they wanted. A signature that began with sandalwood, shifted into toasted walnut, and ended on a breath of ambergris. You're assured it was unlike anything else, and it was never supposed to leave the palace. Historians still argue whether the scent was eventually duplicated in Vienna, where perfumers began releasing strange blends in the early 17th century bearing uncanny Ottoman characteristics. Some say it was a coincidence. Others swear a single linen ribbon soaked in the original scent was smuggled out, sewn into the hem of a diplomat's robe. You imagine that moment, a shaking apprentice pressing scent-soaked silk between his palms, stitching it into fabric with trembling fingers, knowing he might lose his hands if caught. Inside the Grove's hidden workshop, you're shown a series of scrolls known as Koku Haridler scent maps. These were kept under lock and key, away from sunlight and fire, their contents guarded like state secrets. Each map contains swirling symbols, unfamiliar glyphs, and a strange dotted grid system, almost like a musical score. One line means clove, another rose, but it's the spacing between the dots that determines timing and intensity. A misplaced dot can turn of note into an insult. You wonder if any of these maps were ever forged, and you're told, yes, in fact, forgery was a constant problem. To prevent copying, real scent scrolls were marked with what the garden chemists called false notes, decoy smells layered into the fabric that only activated if the scroll was unrolled improperly. Some scrolls were laced with mustard oil, which released an acrid scent if tampered with. Others were infused with sap from rare bitter herbs, causing the scroll to crumble to dust if exposed to air too quickly. These weren't just protections, they were warnings. If you didn't respect the rhythm of the scent, you didn't deserve to decode it. You're led further into the grove, where a small group of gardeners sit in a circle around a single blue and unassuming white tulip called a Gelgesi shadow of dawn. It's said to contain a scent so subtle, so mutable, that it can't be documented. Any attempt to replicate it ends in failure. A Dutch botanist once tried to recreate it, and reportedly burst into tears when all he produced was a watery imitation of damp paper. Whether that's true or just palace propaganda, no one's entirely sure. Then comes the most peculiar part of your morning. You're handed a small wooden box, sealed with beeswax and wrapped in silk. Inside, 3 thin glass tubes, each holding a few drops of liquid. These are scent carriers' portable records of signature tulip blends, used by select court members to communicate in secret. You're told they were once dabbed on gloves, letters, even pets. One sultaness greyhound was said to carry a fragrance code stitched into its collar that meant begin negotiations but do not trust the wine. You're not sure whether to laugh or be impressed, but these scent carriers also had a darker side. One blend bergamot, opium, dried mint was allegedly used as a signal for assassination. Not confirmed, of course, just one of many rumors you'll hear today. Still, you notice that one of the gardeners glances sharply at the tube when you hold it too close. You begin to understand. Fragrance in the Ottoman garden wasn't just beauty. It was power. It could be used to sway a court, to warn a lover, to seal a deal without uttering a single word. In a world where so many eyes watched and so many ears listened, scent was the one messenger that didn't betray you, unless you didn't know how to read it. By midday, the grove quiets again. The secret scrolls are rolled back into their wax-sealed tubes. The scent carriers return to their padded nests. You step outside, back into the open-air garden, and it all smells sweeter somehow now that you know what has been hidden in plain breath all along. And as you pass a bed of pale yellow tulips, one of the gardeners smiles and murmurs, "This one smells like a lie you never told." You don't ask what that means. You just nod and let the scent follow you all the way back to the main path. You return to the main garden just in time to witness a scene unlike anything you've seen before. No secret scrolls, no silent gardeners working in the shadows. This is the Isalonu, the public-facing garden used for formal presentations, political receptions, and perhaps most intriguingly, flower diplomacy. Yes, diplomacy by Tulip. You are led to a viewing platform padded with embroidered cushions and shaded by canopies of dyed silk. Beneath you, a vast tulip bed stretches out like a woven carpet, rows upon rows of flowers arranged not by height or color, but by meaning. This is no random garden party. A foreign ambassador is arriving soon, and today's flower arrangement is no simple gesture of beauty, it's a message, carefully scented and strategically layered. You're told it took 12 gardeners and 2 palace poets to get it right. The head tulip tuner called in the imperial scent master himself to verify the sequence. Every bloom here has been timed to release its fragrance exactly when the breeze turns from the north courtyard. One miscalculated wind, and the message could turn from "We respect your nation" to "We remember your betrayal." And what is this diplomatic message made of? Rose, of course, for honor, but not alone. It's balanced with myrrh for forgiveness, dried tarragon for restraint, and a curious note of burnt cardamom, a man aroma historically associated with negotiation. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans invented this association or simply leaned into its mystique. Either way, it's now a firmly understood message. We are ready to talk but not to beg. You find yourself seated beside a lower-ranking official who clearly knows too much and has had too little sleep. He whispers that last year, during a similar diplomatic visit from the Venetian envoy, a misstep occurred. A batch of tulips meant to smell of acceptance bloomed early, and by the time the meeting began, the dominant scent was bitter clove and bay leaf, known among the Ottomans to mean suspicion. The talks stalled, a marriage proposal was delayed by 7 months, all because a flower got ahead of itself. The ambassador finally arrives, draped in velvets far too heavy for the Istanbul sun. He bows low, smiles wide, and speaks in honeyed syllables, but you notice how he hesitates before sitting. He inhales ever so slightly. Whether he understands the language of the tulips is unclear. But someone beside him, a young aide, probably trained in more than just foreign tongues, smiles faintly. A breath of warm jasmine has just risen. The first part of the message has been received, and so begins the ceremony. No speeches, no scrolls, just tea, music, and petals. The musicians play a slow rhythm, long, drawn notes meant to mirror the slow release of fragrance across the field. Gardeners subtly adjust positions, clearing wind paths and shadow angles with movements that seem casual but are deeply rehearsed. One gardener waves a fan gently near a bed of pink tulips. Another discreetly places a copper dish of warm coals between 2 rows of blooms to coax their scent upward. This is choreography on the level of statecraft. Halfway through, the ambassador is gifted a tulip bulb inside a gilded box. But not just any bulb, this one carries a sealed scent capsule inside the soil. You realize, as it's explained, that this is a kind of olfactory treaty. The bulb, when planted correctly, will bloom into a flower that smells like the exact blend used in today's ceremony. If the same scent is recreated successfully, it's a sign that the message has been understood and accepted. If not, well, it's an awkward silence that can last decades. You marvel at the quiet boldness of this system. No need to shout, no need to bluff, just let the wind carry your intent. The Ottomans didn't just master fragrance, they mastered ambiguity. A scent can suggest without promising, it can imply without offending. And if the wrong conclusion is drawn, blame the breeze. The ceremony ends with the offering of sweet sherbet laced with violets and mint, a taste meant to mirror the final scent note of the garden. The ambassador drinks it without hesitation. His smile widens. Something, somewhere has gone well. You're left alone in the viewing platform after everyone departs. The tulips continue to sway, releasing their coded phrases into an empty sky. You imagine that even the birds circling overhead carry those whispers in their feathers. A gust of wind brings one final note to your nose, amber, with a hint of salt. A signal that says what all great messages say: this is not the end, there will be more. And as you step off the platform and onto the winding path back to the inner garden, a single tulip near the edge of the bed catches your eye. It's not in the arrangement, it wasn't part of the ceremony, but it's blooming anyway, wild and fragrant and perfectly out of place. You lean in, and it smells exactly like a secret that's waiting to be told. You've barely finished your tea before you are beckoned, this time by a pair of older gardeners whose robes trail lightly through crushed thyme on the path. They're leading you toward an enclosed section of the palace grounds, shaded by high walls and carved cypress screens. The moment you cross the threshold, the scent thickens, lush, sticky, intoxicating. This, they whisper, is where tulips went too far. Welcome to the heart of the tulip era, a time when flowers ruled more fiercely than viziers, and fragrance turned into frenzy. The late 17th and early 18th centuries were golden years for the Ottoman elite. Peace reigned for a moment, trade flourished, and the court turned inward toward art, poetry, indulgence, and tulips. So many tulips. You're told that at the peak of this mania, tulips cost more than jewels. Bulbs were exchanged like bribes, hoarded like relics, guarded like children. One story claims a grand vizier traded a small coastal estate for a single rare bulb with a scent like clove-soaked apricots. Another tells of a palace dancer who earned her freedom not through coin or favor, but by gifting the sultan a tulip that smelled of rain on warm linen. Historians still argue whether these tales were real or embellished by jealous courtiers, but either way, the petals had power. You walk through rows of high wooden shelves, each holding shallow trays of tulip bulbs wrapped in silk. These are sleeping legacies, descendants of the most infamous blooms from that era. The gardeners call them vault tulips, and each one has a name more dramatic than the last: night pearl, whisper's edge, blush of a widow. You ask if any still carry the original scents. One gardener lifts a bulb, peels back the silk, and nods solemnly. This one remembers, he says. They show you an old ledger, its pages crackled, its ink faded like tea stains on parchment, but the entries are clear. Tulip names, their scent profiles, and their market values. 1. Marked in red, reads, the widow's flame, musk, sandalwood, tobacco valued at 42 purses. You do the math in your head and realize that you would have purchased a mansion, a vineyard, and probably a ship. All for one bulb. But tulip madness wasn't just about money, it was about status. Hosting a tulip viewing was the height of prestige. You were shown illustrations of grand nighttime ceremonies where entire courtyards were lit by floating lanterns and mirrored basins, reflecting the tulip beds in shimmering waves. Guests walked barefoot through crushed petals, sipping lavender sherbet and breathing in carefully timed scent releases choreographed like music. One noblewoman famously wore a tulip-shaped gown scented with saffron and orange peel, claiming it helped her dream in color. And of course, it couldn't last. Greed bloomed faster than the flowers. Tulip prices skyrocketed, speculators entered the market, and soon tulips were being auctioned in back alleys by candlelight. You see a painted record of one such event. Men huddled around a single potted bloom, bidding with rings, land deeds, even promises of marriage. It's almost comical, almost. You're led next to a small stone amphitheater now abandoned, but once used for scent readings, where fragrance poets would interpret the meaning of specific tulip blends for private audiences. One account claims a performer fainted mid-reading after inhaling a blend too rich in saffron and anise. Another insisted he smelled truth for the first time. That one's debatable. As the mania grew, so did paranoia. Tulip theft became rampant. Gardeners were bound by secrecy oaths. Flower beds were guarded at night by armed men and, in one notorious case, a trained lynx. That last part might be an exaggeration. But then again, so was the era. And finally, you reach the tipping point. A palace edict, carved in marble and now nearly erased by time, banned the purchase of tulips above a certain price. Public gardens were stripped. Private collections were downsized. Some elite families tried to bury their bulbs and deny involvement. Others attempted to hybridize tulips with more respectable flowers like hyacinths as if scent had a morality. You pass one last garden, still intact, called the Hushed Field. No labels, no displays, just rows of faded tulips still releasing gentle fragrance into the late afternoon. It's said these are the last of the untouchables. Tulips grown not for money, not for messages, but for memory. You lean into one. It smells like old parchment and something oddly sweet. The gardener beside you whispers, this one's called Regretful Riches. And as you breathe it in, you realize the tulip era didn't collapse because people stopped loving flowers. It ended because they stopped listening to them. The sun sits lower now, casting a golden net over the palace grounds as you're gently guided to a garden space that feels different. It's tighter, denser. Tulips here aren't arranged in open beds but in narrow, winding rows like whispered thoughts hidden in a diary. You sense it before you smell it, the shift. Something's humming beneath the petals, something tense and coiled. You're in the part of the garden the records don't often mention. The part where petals became protest, where scent became resistance. Welcome to the rebellion in the gardens. Your guide, an older woman with silver threads in her headscarf and the walk of someone who has seen too much and said too little, gestures silently for you to kneel beside a tulip with near black petals veined in burgundy. It doesn't look special, but when you lean in, the scent hits like a whisper shouted across centuries. It starts with cinnamon, sharp, confident, impossible to ignore. Then it softens into sweet basil and ends on something you can't place. Something like stone warmed by the sun or ink that's just dried. This one, she says, was called Whisper to the Vizier. You raise an eyebrow. She only smiles. During the later years of the tulip era, when price controls tightened and common people began to starve while the elite still drank sherbet among scented lanterns, unrest brewed like bitter tea. But not all resistance came with swords. Some of it grew right here, in these beds. Gardeners, especially those without voice or title, began encoding protest into scent blends. Flowers that appeared loyal, growing straight, blooming on time, colored in royal hues, were secretly infused with messages. Not through pigment, through perfume. Historians still argue whether the palace knew, whether the sultan or his viziers understood that a patch of cinnamon-laced tulips beside the imperial bathhouse meant we watch but will not kneel. Or that a rare bloom released only at dusk, a mix of rosemary, burnt date, and myrrh signaled mourning for the people who could no longer afford bread. But the records do show that suddenly, some beds were removed overnight. Some gardeners disappeared, and one tulip, documented simply as soft fire, was officially banned from the palace. Is it a crime? No one knows. But when planted near sandalwood trees, its scent reportedly lingered longer than memory. You pass by another patch, this one surrounded by low hedges and nestled beneath fig trees. These tulips carry scent codes that never made it into the royal catalogs. One releases a dry, smoky aroma like parchment burning. Another smells like fresh lemon zest, but when paired with a neighboring bloom, turns sharp and metallic. You're told this was intentional, a layered message about clarity curdled by control. You ask if there's any written record of these scent protests. Your guide shakes her head. They smelled. Then they were gone. That's how truth survives. You step into a shaded alcove where a faded mural lies half covered by ivy. It shows a circle of tulip tuners standing in a ring, each holding a single bloom with one hand and pressing their other hand over their chest. It is said this image was banned after the so-called fragrance apprising a rumored night when a group of gardeners arranged their entire quadrant into one massive coded message that spelled in scent a demand for better wages and fewer restrictions. Whether this event actually happened or was invented later by nostalgic poets is unclear. But what's known is this. The next morning, the garden was stripped and replanted. Every single tulip was removed. Every tool was replaced. But the soil? That still remembers. One tulip here, particularly fragile and pale, is known as Hidden Bruise. It smells like rose and black pepper. You wouldn't notice it unless you were paying attention. It's planted low, away from the breeze, as if not meant to be found. But when you breathe in, your chest tightens. It's grief, somehow, bottled into root and petal. You wonder if a scribe ever inhaled this flower and understood everything that had gone unsaid in court for decades. There's humor here too, the quiet, rebellious kind. One tulip carries a scent blend of mint, cumin, and goat hair meant to mimic the vizier's personal cologne, but twisted just enough to be comical. It's called His Grace's socks. Another tulip is completely odorless but planted beside a heavily perfumed variety so that it always seems like it's contributing but isn't that one's. Simply called council seat. And just when you think nothing more could surprise you, your guide produces a tiny vial glass, cloudy with age, sealed with a plug of wax and a faint red thread. Inside is a preserved essence of one of the lost protest tulips, distilled just once and kept hidden all these years. She offers it to you with care. You open it slowly. The scent rises ginger, sage, and a fleeting whisper of coal smoke. It smells like warmth denied, like anger folded into patience. You sit with the vial in your lap as the breeze picks up, carrying the soft, strange symphony of the rebellion garden through the cypress slats. No flags were raised here, no banners, just fragrance, just the truth. And though most of these messages have faded from human memory, the flowers somehow still remember exactly what they were trying to say. By now, you know the gardens intimately, their curves, their shadows, their secret languages spoken in root and resin. But this next path winds inward, into the part of the palace where few are ever invited, past the outer courts, past the reflecting pools, past even the men who pretend not to see what they don't understand. You're being brought to the harem, and more specifically, to a secluded grove known in whispers as the Scented Vale, a place where tulips were not merely decorative or diplomatic, but deeply, unapologetically personal. The first thing you notice is the texture of the air. It's softer. Not empty, never that, but less deliberate, less performance. The scents don't arrive like declarations. They arrive like secrets. Rose, then iris, then maybe a trace of honey left in an old bowl. Here, in this sheltered garden behind filigree screens and carved lattice doors, the women of the harem built their own language of fragrance, not for power, not for politics, but for identity. The woman guiding you now is graceful, older, dressed in layered silk dyed with crushed hibiscus. She carries no tools, only a silk pouch filled with tulip petals dried, perfumed, pressed into memory. We were not permitted to write letters freely, she begins, but no one stopped us from planting. And with that, the story begins. You learn that many of the harem women, especially the Cadler, the Sultan's wives and consorts, used tulips to express moods, rivalries, desires, even warnings. Tulip beds were divided by scent notes, not rank. One petal blend might indicate longing. Another, defiance. Yet another, quiet despair wrapped in rose oil. A new concubine might plant a row of scentless tulips to signify humility or concealment. A senior consort might blend frankincense and myrtle to project spiritual confidence. The scents became subtle weapons, emotional shields, and coded invitations all at once. One tulip bed, still preserved today, is known as Silken Mercy. Its scent is unusually complex, starting with pear, rolling into warm musk, and finishing with a note of something strangely like old parchment, a woman named. Planted those, your guide says. They say she used to scent her poetry with the same blend so that her thoughts would reach the Sultaness' chamber even if her words did not. Historians still argue whether fragrance-based communication inside the harem was formalized or simply evolved organically among the women, but contemporary records show that some eunuchs were trained to interpret these scent messages, delivering verbal confirmations or replanting certain bulbs to answer on behalf of the sultan. One record notes an incident where two consorts competed for favor by out-scenting each other's tulip arrangements. The rivalry ended only when both beds were destroyed in a sudden downpour, a twist the poets later called the mercy of Allah's rain. The emotional range of these tulips was astounding. One variety, S. Saba morning without words, released no scent during daylight, but bloomed with a powdery jasmine smell precisely at midnight. Another, Vadadilmi Say's promised voice was so delicately scented that it required absolute stillness to perceive. It was often planted near sleeping chambers, the unspoken message. I'm listening, are you? You kneel beside a low bench where young girls once sat weaving garlands, each flower strand braided with tulips that held intention, one for a friend, one for a secret keeper, one for a future that may never come. Some of these garlands were burned in small, private ceremonies, fragrance rising like a prayer only the wind could interpret. One woman, history recalls, requested that her tulip-scented scarf be buried with her. "So I don't go alone," she reportedly said. But there's laughter here too. You pass a bed of boldly scented tulips, strong citrus, pink peppercorn, a hint of goat milk, and are told they were part of a private joke between two rival consorts who once swapped bulbs in each other's planters. The result? A scent message that said roughly, "You may be favored now, but I dance better." It became something of a legend, and neither woman admitted to the prank. The flowers, however, bloomed in tandem for years. One especially poignant bloom is shown to you at the end of the path, and Latmadina lay unweeping without telling. It's pale lavender with streaks of white and carries a scent that's almost evasive. It smells different every time you lean in, sometimes bitter, sometimes floral, sometimes almost metallic. It is said to have been created by a woman who lost a child and was forbidden from mourning publicly. Instead, she gardened. The scent said what her voice was not allowed to say. You close your eyes and let the fragrance settle around you. These tulips weren't bred for spectacle. They were personal archives, emotional maps passed down in petals and oil. Their meaning isn't found in catalogs or scrolls. It's felt, inhaled, remembered through the body, not the mind. And as you rise to leave the scented veil, your guide presses a single dried petal into your palm. It smells faintly of lavender and mint, gentle, patient, undemanding. That one, she says, is just for peace. And you realize that in a place where so many voices were softened, scent gave them volume. And the flowers, somehow, still carry those voices, whispering softly through time, never forgotten. The light has taken on that golden sideways slant that happens right before the sky exhales for evening, and you find yourself led through an arched passageway of woven reeds into the most curious part of the palace grounds yet. This isn't a garden meant for guests or grandeur. This place hums with utility, not performance. You've entered the domain of the Gsg. The night watchers of bloom. They are few, these gardeners, and quieter even than the Leusteler. You spot them only when they move gray-robed silhouettes among the rows, often crouched, often still, their hands gloved in lambskin and their heads wrapped to protect against the night chill. They begin their work as the sun sets. Not before. Why? Because some tulips reveal their fragrance only in the dark. You trail one of them, a tall man with a limp and the steady movements of someone who has done this for decades. His first task is to gently lift a glass dome from over a single tulip. As he removes it, the air instantly changes. A warm breeze brushes your cheek, and the scent that escapes is astonishing. Ripe plum, cedarwood, and something deeper, earthy like the moment right before rain. He breathes it in, says nothing, and replaces the dome. Test complete. Historians still argue whether these night releases were intentional or simply a botanical accident. Turned advantage. Either way, the Ottomans leaned into it. In fact, some of the empire's most precious tulip varieties were designated Gc clary night flowers, trained and bred to unfurl and perfume only after dusk. This turned tulip care into a round-the-clock endeavor, and for that you needed the night watchers. You watch as they move between flower beds with lanterns shaded in colored glass blue, green, deep amber, each light frequency chosen to guide a specific tulip's rhythm. White light is forbidden here. It's said to startle the petals, disrupting their release. Instead, they work in hues that mimic the moon. One tulip, Cessa's a silent moon, refuses to open under anything but violet-filtered flame. Their tools are strange and quiet. Tweezers made from polished horn. Scent traps, little gauze cones used to collect vapor samples from blooming tulips. And then there's the cocoa-wipely scent thread. You're shown how this works. A cotton thread is stretched between two flower beds. As night air moves, the thread absorbs fragrance from each bloom it passes. In the morning, it is coiled and placed inside a clay pot for reading, a scent journal, they call it. You're told that a well-trained nose can retrace the wind's path from thread alone, but these gardeners aren't just sniffing flowers, they're guarding them. Not from thieves, not here, from moonlight, from overwatering. From one another, you witness a tulip being moved 3 feet to the left because its scent was clashing with a neighboring bloom. Like two poets shouting at once, the gardener mutters. You're told the watchers sometimes sleep outside, near the flowers, heads tilted against tree trunks, lulled by the very scents they've trained to protect. One gardener even built a low wooden platform near the Yolu the dream path, a line of tulips so fragrant at night that some say it induces lucid dreams in those who sleep nearby. You ask if that's just myth, and the youngest watcher, barely more than a boy, shrugs. I don't dream anymore, he says, not sadly, just factually. You observe a watcher make small notes in a wax tablet using a stylus dipped in clove oil. The notes aren't words, but marks, arcs, lines, curves. You realize it's not for reading later. It's for remembering now. A mental imprint of the sense behavior. One tulip flared too fast, another dimmed too soon. These watchers don't document history, they witness it, and that's enough. In a sheltered alcove, you're invited to try Karen Kokumar reading the dark. You're blindfolded, handed 3 tulip heads one after another, and asked to speak what you feel, not just smell. The first smells like citrus and chalk, you say unfinished. The second, honey and charcoal. Old love, you whisper. The third. You can't explain it. It smells like the feeling of returning home after forgetting something important. You simply say, remembered, the watchers nod. That's the entire point. One story shared in hushed tones is about the Sesazan Lama, the Silent Pact. During one winter, a rare tulip with a scent like crushed pearls bloomed out of season. Rather than expose it to daytime curiosity, the watchers formed a guard circle around it every night, shielding it from wind and light until spring. No official order was given, no one spoke of it, and yet the flower survived. Its descendants bloom still only at midnight, only in the presence of silence. As you leave, one of the watchers hands you a small sachet linen, bound with thread dyed in beetroot. Inside is a pinch of soil, a thread of cotton, and a single dried petal. For sleeping, he says. You ask if it's a scent blend. He shakes his head. It's a night map for your dreams. And just like that, he vanishes into the tulips. Like a shadow made of scent. The next morning arrives quietly, wrapped in mist. You've become used to waking with the garden, your breath sinking with the early perfume of leaves and soil. But today, the path you're led down doesn't open into petals or sunlight. Instead, you descend a staircase stone, cool, echoing with the memories of hundreds of footsteps long. Faded. You're headed not into a garden, but into a vault. A place the Ottomans once called Koku Hifsa, the memory of scent. This is where the tulip codes were recorded. Not in books, not in scrolls of ink, but in something stranger. Scent printing. At the bottom of the stairwell, the air shifts. It doesn't smell like flowers anymore. It smells like dust, resin, dried herbs, and time. Clay urns, glass vials, linen-wrapped bundles, each labeled not with words but symbols, fill shelves that line the walls like the archive of a perfumer librarian. You're greeted by the Kokutibi, the scent scribe. He's draped in gray muslin, his fingers permanently stained with planned toils. You're here to read the past, he says, and gestures for you to follow. He hands you a scroll. You expect words. But instead, you find stitched linen segments, each faintly tinted and perfumed. This, he explains, is a scent diagram. Every segment represents a stage of bloom, a note of fragrance, a coded emotion. The ink is clove and pomegranate. The cloth has been infused with oils, some so old they've lost their identity. Still, you can smell something sweet, dry. Like faded laughter, scent printing, it turns out, was an Ottoman innovation born not just from love of tulips but from a deep distrust of spoken memory. Fragrance could be distorted, forgotten. So the Leustaler devised a way to preserve the codes not with words, but through transference. Oils were soaked into treated paper, sealed with beeswax, and buried for seasons. Some of these scent documents aged like wine, others soured. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans truly understood chemical preservation, or whether this was all a beautiful accident. Either way, the results remain dozens of scent impressions stored. Like emotional fossils. You're shown a bound volume, its pages thick with stitched pockets. Each pocket holds a dried tulip petal and a diagram pinpricks, dashed lines, and tiny scent glyphs burned into cloth. You inhale one pocket, it's jasmine and coal. The next, lemon rind and iron. You're told this was used to recreate a tulip scent during a year when the bulbs failed to bloom due to late frost. In that moment, the scribe tells you, the scent became the flower. Some records show attempts at something almost like botanical copyright tulip codes, so unique they were sealed with official imperial wax, and any attempt to duplicate them without permission was considered theft of royal property. One famous case involved a French botanist who tried to mimic an Ottoman tulipes signature scent and failed so poorly the result was banned by the Sultan's court, his punishment. Not exile. He was made to work in the spice markets until he could correctly identify 50 scents blindfolded. You find an unlabeled scroll near the bottom of a cedar cabinet. It's older than the rest, and the fabric is nearly translucent. The scribe unrolls it reverently. The scent is faint but unmistakable. Almond milk, rain-soaked stone, and a strange metallic finish. This one, he says quietly, has no name. It was found after a fire. No records, no notes. But the scent survived. The implication is clear. Something or someone wanted it to be remembered. In a corner of the vault, you're shown a strange contraption half loom, half press used to print scent codes into ribbons. A tulip scent would be captured, transferred onto silk, and then stitched with a symbol. These ribbons were sometimes worn in the Sultan's court not for decoration, but to speak without speaking. A nobleman might wear a ribbon scented with sandalwood and pine to signal a desire for alliance. A court lady might wear a clove and saffron to express defiance, or love, or grief. You wonder how many conversations drifted silently across rooms before dissolving into nothing. The scribe finally leads you to the deepest shelf, where a single bulb is housed in glass desiccated now, pale as bone. Beneath it lies a linen scrap infused with what was once a bloom's fragrance. The glyph stitched beside it is unique, a spiral inside a spiral. This, he says, was the only tulip patented by the empire. Its code was protected, its scent locked into law. No one was allowed to recreate it. No one remembers why. The name, long since lost, is still spoken in whispers. Unutilmaz the unforgettable. Before you go, you're invited to make your own mark. The scribe hands you a small square of cloth and lets you choose from a tray of oils. You dab sandalwood, then a drop of bergamot, a hint of rosemary. You press it into a blank page in a quiet ceremony. Your own code, a small act of remembrance, no words, just scent, and as you climb the stairs back toward daylight, you carry it with you. A whisper of who you were, sealed into thread and time. The daylight that greets you now feels foreign. After the dim vault, the brightness has edges. But the garden awaits not just in bloom, but in memory. You re-enter it slowly, each step falling softer, as if afraid the flowers might not recognize you anymore. But they do. You can tell by the way the breeze picks up, brushing past your shoulder like an old friend who still knows your scent. You're back in the open tulip fields now, but something has changed. The grandeur is fading, the rows are less defined, the petals not quite as polished. A few of the beds have been left untended. It's subtle, still beautiful, but the decline is visible. The era of fragrance codes is ending. You're told that by the late 18th century, as the empire shifted priorities, as foreign influence poured into Istanbul, and as politics began to overtake poetics, the art of tulip scent coding began to dissolve. Not all at once. It was a slow wilting. The imperial garden lost its budget. The scent scribes were reassigned or retired. The Leusteler, once revered like poets, were no longer seen as essential. Some emigrated, some faded into anonymity, others planted silently in their private courtyards, refusing to let go of a language no one else remembered how to speak. One by one, the scent codes became just flowers, still lovely, still cultivated, but no longer read. The younger generation began favoring bold colors, fast-growing hybrids, showier blooms with no memory of musk, sandalwood, or clove. Perfume houses imported French formulas. Public gardens planted rose for symmetry, not symbolism, and the slow, intimate craft of scent coding was pushed into myth. Historians still argue what caused the final unraveling. Was it the influence of European gardening styles, where sight ruled over scent? Was it the industrial era's demand for speed and productivity? Or was it simply that the court no longer had time for tulips that needed to be listened to? A flower that speaks in silence requires a kind of attention the world has stopped offering. You pass a garden wall now half covered in ivy. The etching beneath it reads, Nisaleti, Dumadk, it spoke, we did not hear. It's barely legible anymore. Time, ironically, has faded the very words that warned of forgetting. And yet not. All was lost. Some families continued to grow coated tulips in secret. You're shown a courtyard deep in a neighborhood behind the mosque. Inside, a woman in her 70s is tending 2 tulips that her grandmother once planted. She explains that she knows only the names Mavi, Yaril Kalp, Sessa's Niet Blue Dream, Wounded Heart, Silent Intent. She doesn't know the scent's meanings, but she still grows them in the same soil mix, the same shade pattern. I don't need to know what they said, she shrugs. It's enough that they're still saying something. You meet a calligrapher who tried, once, to paint the forgotten scent glyphs from memory. He made 100 tiles, each with a different spiral, arc, or dot, and arranged them around a single tulip bed. He couldn't read the message, but when the flowers bloomed, he swore the breeze smelled like his childhood. That was enough. One tulip bed in an abandoned palace annex is known now as Cape Satyr, the Lost Line. No one knows who planted it. It appears each spring, blooms with a scent that shifts from mint to ash to violet, then disappears again. Gardeners refuse to uproot it. Whatever it's saying, they say, still matters. And you, walking through all this through fading borders and ghost glyphs, begin to realize that decline isn't the same as disappearance. A language forgotten is still a language spoken by someone, somewhere. And maybe tulips, like people, just go quiet when no one's listening. You lean over a small, overlooked bloom beside a path. It smells like rain on burnt sugar and the sleeve of someone you once knew. There is no label, no scent code, no glyphs. But still it speaks. You listen. As twilight falls, the wind changes. It carries something old, yes, but not finished. A single tulip near the garden wall shivers as if remembering who it used to be, and its scent, when it rises, smells not of history but of hope. Evening sets in now like a warm exhale, the kind that comes after a long, slow breath you didn't realize you were holding. The garden is dim but not asleep. Tulips glow faintly in the last orange spill of light, and the air feels softer like it's been brushed with silk. You return once more to the heart of the grounds, not for another lesson or tale, but to visit what remains of the oldest bed of scent-coated tulips. Listen, the language of the tulip. It isn't grand anymore. A simple rectangle of soil edged in worn marble, nothing flashy. But the tulips here still bloom, not in perfect order, not in disciplined rows, but in a kind of gentle chaos. Some lean sideways. Others rise tall but curve at the top. Their colors are muted antique pinks, dusty purples, creams with freckles, and their scent, that somehow has endured, faint threads of spice and smoke and sugar still hang in the air. Not loud but stubborn, the kind of smell that waits patiently for you to notice. You sit beside it quietly, on a stone bench worn smooth by centuries of gardeners who sat here before you. You think of all the things you've learned not in books or lectures, but through petals and breath, that a garden can speak. That scent can hold meaning. That silence, when trained properly, can say more than words. You remember the scent codes, the rebels in the hedgerows, the night watchers with their moon-colored lamps. You remember that not every tulip bloomed on time, and not every message was heard. And yet somehow none of it was wasted. A gardener walks by and places a single tulip in a cup of water near you. Its stem is bent, its leaves are spotted. Its scent rises slowly, rose at first, then fig, then the smoky finish of old parchment. You ask the gardener what its name is. He shrugs and says, "We just call it Anlatin, the one who tells." You smile, because of course it is. Historians still debate whether the fragrance language of Ottoman tulips ever truly existed. The documents are sparse, the evidence mostly anecdotal. But you know better now. Because you've seen the scrolls made of scent and silence. You've read the garden that remembers more than the empire it bloomed under. And you've felt it, the hush that settles over you when a flower speaks directly to the part of your heart that no one else can name. And then, as if on cue, a breeze lifts a wave of scent from the bed. It washes over you like a lullaby. Something warm, something green, something old and gold and slow. You let it fill your lungs, you let it linger, and as the last light fades and the first star appears, you whisper a promise not to preserve the garden, but to remember what it taught you. That language doesn't always need letters, that memory can live in the breath, between blooms. And that sometimes the truest messages are the ones no one else can smell but you. So now, as the garden quiets and the night folds gently around it, you feel yourself slipping into that soft space where thought loosens and everything becomes weightless. The tulips are still blooming, somewhere out there in the darkness, their petals barely moving, their stories exhaled in silence. Their fragrance drifts low, like a lullaby made of spice and dust and memory. You don't need to move. Not now. You've walked enough. Let the scent settle around you like a shawl layered with musk and mint and something you can't quite name, but which feels like forgiveness. Let the earth beneath you hold your weight. You are not here to figure anything out. You are here to rest, to breathe, to remember something soft and ancient that was never meant to be rushed. If you listen closely, you might still hear the footsteps of the night watchers, padding quietly between the flower beds. You might feel the warmth of an oil lamp flickering gently near a bloom that only opens after midnight. And maybe, just maybe, you'll dream in scent tonight, your sleep carried on threads of rose and clove and all the unspoken things the garden whispered just to you. You're safe now. The wind is calm. The petals have all said their piece. Let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts float like pollen on the breeze. You've learned a secret language. You've listened to a forgotten world. Now let it all go. And rest.